I know what you're all thinking. Where's the video on the Italian Grand Prix? And yes, I usually do a reaction video, and maybe I should do more stupid gawping faces to please the algorithm, but looking back on everything, there's not really enough to do my usual stuff with that. If every point can be summed up in 30 seconds and then go, that's good, or that's bad, it's not really going to give people what I usually come up with, so yeah, that's why I'm not doing one. Really, the only major talking point was the McLaren swapping back over after that botched pit stop, which was absolutely hilarious, so yeah, hopefully we'll have something more normal at Baku. Now, something I like to do around here is something called theme videos. If you've been here before, you'll have probably seen a themed video, usually in the run-up to a big event or off the back of some big news. And, well, they're not usually planned, but I like to have fun with them because sometimes I'll do one video and then I'll be like, oh, I can do that off the back of it, and they all sort of go into each other, if you follow me. Last time, I talked about Colton Herta signing his test deal with Cadillac, and looking at how he's going to spend less time sitting in IndyCar going, why can't I get a license, and now deciding to actually do something about it. All to realise his dream, so fair play to him. And the reactions on that video were quite interesting. Some said that he had no business being here, some said that he should do alright, and some said that if he doesn't come over and immediately dominate, then there will be some reconsideration over his chances of getting a full-time ride. This being that 24 is old by Formula 2 standards, let alone Formula 1 these days. How times have changed. Senna was 24 when he came in, and that was considered young at the time. And in that video I mentioned that when an American fails in Formula 1, it takes a while for the next one to come through. After Michael Andretti's flop in 1993, even if he did get a podium at Monza, it wouldn't be until 2006 that an American started a Grand Prix, that being Scott Speed driving for Toro Rosso. He scored no points in his time at the team and was sacked at the end of 2007. So it was 13 years before the next American came along, and while Speed lasted longer than Andretti did, he still didn't set the world on fire. He might have actually scored a point if he hadn't overtaken under yellow flags in Australia in 2006. And after Speed didn't show some, well, speed, it was Logan Sargent's turn to have a crack, driving for Williams. But after a string of crashes through 2024 and only scoring a single point in his career, Williams cast him aside and turned to Franco Colapinto for the remaining part of the 2024 season, before replacing Franco with Carlos Sainz. Now, it seems that Williams is having a great season compared to previous ones, even if Carlos can't catch a break. At least the collision with Behrman was actually his fault this time. So as it stands, Michael Andretti is the last American driver in Formula 1 to score points. Plural. Sargent scored just one, which is, well, singular. But before the son of the head of America's racing royal family came another American driver who, despite not winning anything, had quite a long and marginally successful career. And that person was Eddie Cheever. Eddie Cheever seems to be a driver who has gone under the radar in terms of American drivers in Formula 1. Phil Hill and Mario Andretti won the World Championships for the US of A, and Mario's son had his less than ideal part season in 1993, as we've already established, and covered in a dedicated video, if you're interested. But Cheever was, before Andretti Jr. came along, the American driver in Formula 1. Well, actually, that's not really true, is it, because of Andretti winning the championship, but there was that time, anyway, that Cheever was the American driver in Formula 1. And as one website put it, he got to Formula 1 in the most un-American way possible. Now, typically, American racers start on the dirt ovals and work their way up to NASCAR or IndyCar, or CART as it was back then, or maybe even USAC before that, but we'll just call it IndyCar for simplicity's sake. The history is, well, it's a bit complicated. But either way, Eddie didn't start on the dirt ovals because he started his career in karting. He basically did things the reverse to Mario Andretti. Andretti was born in Italy but moved to America, but Cheever was born in Phoenix and grew up in Rome. And if there's one thing that we don't really do over here, it's ovals. Well, I mean, we kind of do in the UK, but for things like Bangor Racing and Brisker, and I need to get up to Hensford at some point and watch it. And it's also one in Kings Lynn and Skegness where it's also pretty popular. But for Eddie, he was living in Italy. And on the continent, Italy is the perfect place in Europe to hone your skills. Because it's Italy. After football, it's probably the country's second sporting religion. And it's not like he was racing in some proverbial farmers league either. because his contemporaries were Riccardo Patrese and Elio De Angelis, two drivers that should probably get their own videos at some point. And Cheever started racing in karts at 13 and had graduated to car racing in just 3 years. In his junior career, Cheever teamed up with fellow American Danny Sullivan in Formula 3 in 1975, and then in 1976, 7 and 8 he was driving for Project 4 Racing. Now you might not have heard of them, but they're pretty important in the overall history of Formula 1. If you stick Marlboro in front and then abbreviate it, you get MP4, the McLaren chassis prefix. Project 4 was the team that Ron Dennis ran before he took over at McLaren. Cheever's rise through the ranks was so fast that Enzo Ferrari himself was looking at signing the American for 1978. Cheever had initially been signed on a testing deal with a view to move him up whenever Enzo felt like moving him up. He was there when Carlos Reutemann was doing secret tests with Michelin, and at the same time he did a race in a privately entered Group 5 BMW at Vallelunga. But in that race, the tyre failed on the second lap out of the pits, and he crashed head-on into the Armco and went under it, with the impact shattering the bones on his left hand. For 3 months, he couldn't touch his little finger. And while in hospital, the press announced that Ferrari had signed Gilles Villeneuve instead, so Eddie went to Enzo and broke off the contract. He called it a decision that almost ruined his career. So while Villeneuve got to go straight in at a top team, Cheever's career was going to take a slight detour. But that's the thing with Formula 1 and racing as a whole. How many times have we seen two people come in at the same time who are both highly rated, and one goes on one career path with good cars through being in the right places at the right time, while the other spends the career milling around in the mid-pack? Jamie Caroline utterly destroyed Oscar Piastri in British Formula 4. One's about to win the World Championship and the other is... well, I don't know where he is right now. So Eddie ended up at the Theodore team, a team more likely to be found on the now defunct F1 Reject site than somewhere like here, and he failed to qualify for the 2 races he entered. He then spent 1 race at the about to go bust Hesketh team where he was... well, he was there. I mean, he was at the race. That's about it. He retired after 8 laps after starting 25th of 26. But he was going to find a full-time drive in 1980 when Osella graduated up to the big time from the juniors. And as is often the case with teams like Osella, they were underfunded and slow. Eddie had the naivety to think that everybody in Europe was as well organised as Ron Dennis was. He was about to get the shock of his life. The only thing you can really do in those sorts of cars is push what the car will do. Outperform it a bit, if you will. The car was 200 pounds overweight and the ground effect wasn't working properly. He didn't finish a single race in an Osella until Monza, and Eddie was definitely doing something right because Ken Tyrrell had spotted him from afar and signed him for the 1981 season. And his scouting abilities were justified almost immediately as Eddie scored 5th on his debut at the US Grand Prix West at Long Beach. He was not classified at Brazil and then retired at Argentina and Imola, but scored 2 more points finishes at Zolder and Monaco, while taking 2 final scores at Silverstone and Hockenheim. 10 points in a Tyrrell isn't bad. Ligier followed for 1982, where he was partner with Jacques Lafitte. He opened the season with 3 successive retirements, and then missed the San Marino Grand Prix because of the FOCA boycott. The boycott that included the likes of McLaren, Lotus and Williams, but then scored his first podium at Zolder, which was a race weekend that was known for all the wrong reasons. But over the course of that absolutely mental 1982 season, Eddie scored 3 podiums, which is incredibly good considering that the Ligier wasn't exactly great, and he scored 15 points in total. 5 more than the previous year, but still 12th in the standings. Feels a bit like the last retrospective I did on Kobayashi, where he finished 10th in the standings like 3 years in a row or something ridiculous like that. But there was going to be more to come from the American, because for 1983 he was called up to race for Renault. His teammate for 1983? Well, that would be Alain Prost. A blessing or a curse? You decide. Because Prost was the rising star and would become one of the greatest drivers the sport has ever seen. So if you're constantly being compared to that particular person and having that person as your yardstick, it's going to make you look bad no matter what you do. See also anybody who's a teammate of Max Verstappen. It also didn't help that this was still the early days of turbocharging in Formula 1, and while Renault was the pioneer of this way of getting power from the engine, the Renault was woefully unreliable. Despite challenging for the top 10 every qualifying session, the yellow car was blowing up far too often for him to do anything with it. Meanwhile, Prost almost won the championship. Prost only just missed out, PK pipping him right at the end, and then there was the controversy surrounding Brabham's so-called rocket fuel, which I've done a video on in the past. At the end of the season, neither driver was kept on for 1984. Prost went to McLaren, while Cheever, he went to Alfa Romeo. So at this point, Cheever was looking like one of those journeyman drivers. A driver that just can't find his place in a team, and while others might have jumped from team to team taking a boatload of cash with them, there was still enough raw talent for teams to notice him and take him on. He was proving to be one of those drivers that had a little bit of a certain something, and he really found his home on street circuits. At Alfa, where they were powered by the thirsty and unreliable V8s, he scored just 1 point in 2 years. That being when he got 4th place at the 1984 Brazilian Grand Prix. 7th at Imola was the closest he would get to a point score for the rest of the season. But the reliability of that Alfa was absolutely atrocious, and at Monaco, he actually failed to qualify, missing out by 2/10 in what was actually, for the time, a very close qualifying session. Although everybody except Tyrrell was on turbo, so everything was probably evened out a bit. But either way, he didn't make the start. The other Alfa of Patrese did make the grid, starting in 14th. After 2 lacklustre seasons in 1984 and 1985, he would be out of Formula 1 for 1986, although he did do a one-off appearance for Carl Haas's team in 1986 at Detroit. Although for 1987, he would be back with a new team. And actually, just as a bit of extra info here, that drive that Cheever took in 1986 was actually offered to Mario Andretti first, but Andretti turned it down, saying that Haas, that being Carl, not Gene, would have been better off hiring Michael instead. But when Michael was denied a super license by the FIA, the seat was then offered to Eddie. So I think it's the only time that Formula 1 has ever seen an American driver in an American-built car with an American engine at an American race. What's that? Dan Gurney? Yeah, that team was American registered, but the car was built in Britain. He was now going to be racing for Arrows, and Arrows being backed by an American insurance company probably helped things. United States Fidelity and Guarantee, or just USF&G. You've never heard of them? Yeah, that's because they no longer exist. While the Arrows wasn't exactly the greatest car to grace Formula 1 in 1987, it was still a point scorer when things went right. This being the era of reliability gone mad and the turbos starting to be reined in as well. But with the BMW Straight 4 in the back, albeit rebadged Megatron, which is the coolest name ever, he did get 4 points finishes. 4th at Spa, 6th at Detroit, 6th at Estoril, and 4th in Mexico. Reliability was still a bit iffy on the car though, and there was the usual string of retirements, much like he had at Alfa, but at least he was scoring points again. 8 points took him to his second best finish of 10th in the standings. Wasn't Megatron one of the Transformers? Like the boss of the baddies or something? What were they called? The BattleBots or the robot people? I don't think I've ever seen it, to be honest. But either way, he was at Arrows through 1988 and was once again scoring points. Not as many as he'd got in 1987, but he was scoring points. 6th at Mexico, 6th again at Spa, and then got a podium in Italy. And it was the first time standing on the podium since he was 3rd, also at Monza, in 1983. While Derek Warwick outscored him that year, the contributions of that podium helped Arrows out massively as they went on to finish 5th in the Constructors, their highest ever finish. But 1989 though would be his final season in Formula 1. His career had basically stalled and he wasn't getting any attention from any of the big teams. But that wasn't going to stop him from getting a good result, because at the US Grand Prix on the streets of Phoenix, his hometown, Cheever took a podium spot. He managed to bring the car home in 3rd at the first race at that particular street circuit, despite having a fuel pickup problem and one of the rear brakes completely failing. And he was 17th on the grid to start that race as well. But then again, the race was one of heavy attrition. 6 cars finished, and Cheever was the last car still on the lead lap. He'd finished just 1 point behind Warwick come the end, closer than he'd been in the previous year, but either way, he was out of Formula 1. So he didn't exactly batter his teammates every year, but he did alright considering the era he was in. Okay, yes, he did have Alain Prost as a teammate in 1983, a man who some say should be a 7-time champion if things are ever so slightly changed in regards to circumstances. But because of the nature of the era and the cars he had, Cheever's career is essentially pretty good, but what could have been. With the exception of his Renault in 1983, his cars were mid-grid at best. The Renault meanwhile was a hot lap merchant and Prost was the main guy. And it was also a Renault Turbo, so it was likely to blow up than do anything else. So really, non-finishes were the norm. When his car was working properly, he was able to get it into some very good positions, and being able to do so with a Ligier, a Tyrrell and an Arrows of all the cars he had during the 80s, that's actually really good. The thing is though, it's hard to tell inconsistency with some of these stats that I have in front of me here, because without knowing where he qualified for every race, it's not that easy to figure out. I could go through every single Grand Prix, but I'd be here forever. Those who know more than I do say that he was inconsistent. He'd have a great performance one weekend, followed by an anonymous one the next. Eddie also called his younger self impetuous, impatient and arrogant, because he just couldn't wait to get into Formula 1 or racing in general, and that sports car race cost him a shot at racing for Ferrari, who would go on to win the championship 2 years later. He even admitted that when he was testing for Ferrari, he was certain that he'd be driving the following year. Even though he could still test while Villeneuve had the race seat, it wasn't an F1 drive, so he just cancelled the contract. But still, Eddie Cheever has the record for the most starts by an American driver in Formula 1, 132. Andretti has 128 starts but has 131 entries, which are not the same thing. And while still racing in Formula 1, he'd do some extracurricular activities, such as winning 10 sports car races for Jaguar in the World Sports Car Championship, this being when the Jags were run by Tom Walkinshaw, who, ironically enough, would end up purchasing Arrows later on. So for the start of the 1990s, he'd gone back to America and was now racing in kart. Now, IndyCar. He moved to kart in 1990, driving for the legendary Chip Ganassi team. At that year's Indy 500, he finished 8th and was the Rookie of the Year for that particular race, and would then take the overall Rookie of the Year honours at the end of the season. He followed that with a second place qualifying at the 500 in 1992, but would later finish 4th. So he was scoring some decent finishes, but he wasn't winning. In fact, in his entire kart career between 1990 and 1995, he never won a race. But in 1996, the split happened. Kart went one way and the Indy Racing League went the other way. Cheever, meanwhile, stayed in the IRL, running for Team Menard to start with, and at the 1996 Indy 500, he set the fastest race lap of 236.1 miles an hour. For the 1997 season, he'd set up his own team, and then in 1998, he'd start 17th for the 500 and won it. So he's at least got that to his name, winning the Indy 500. That's an achievement for anybody, irrespective of what series you race in. But for his F1 career, it really is a case of, what might have been. What if he had been more patient? What if he'd stayed at Ferrari? What if he'd not driven that BMW? All questions worth asking. Formula 1 is just if backwards after all. And like mentioned, you can have one guy who gets to have one hell of a career while the other goes in another direction. And it's these small decisions, or rather large decisions in this case, since Eddie asked Enzo Ferrari himself to cancel that contract, that then led Eddie to an F1 life in substandard machinery. Except for that one season that he was in a fast but fragile Renault. But I don't know. It's one thing to wonder about in the comments at least. And what it also makes you wonder is, has Colton Herta left it a bit too late to tackle this F1 dream? Is Eddie Cheever going to be a benchmark for Herta, or is he going to be a warning from history? So then, a look at the F1 career of Eddie Cheever, the man with more F1 starts than any other American in Formula 1. If this has been a fun look through the motorsport history books, then do leave the video a like so I know a good job was done, and for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help out with contributions to image purchasing or otherwise keeping the lights on, there'll be a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and anything else you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks for one and done donations and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.